Well, good morning to all of our distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues. It's good to see you all here. Since it is a relatively small group, I would invite you, if you'd like, to take a couple seats forward and make it a little more conversational. We're not using the sound system, so again, feel free to move up a seat or a row. And we had to wait, of course, for the distinguished Chapel Wainwright. So, sure, thanks for joining us today. But welcome to the panel on iChapel. So, talking about social media, technology, and its use in ministry. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Periscope, YouTube, podcast, Facebook Live, GroupMe, Twitter, WhatsApp, a long list of social media platforms that were a little overwhelming as I started to dig into them to find out what millennials and our Gen Z soldiers are using to stay connected and to experience community, to live their lives. So the question is, should chapels use these mediums to connect with soldiers? What is the proper role of technology in our services and in our chapel communities and for our unit ministry teams? And in this panel, we're going to hope to help our group of participants understand how Gen Z interacts with the digital world, taking some of these best practices and being able to leverage them for ministry across the Army. So I'm very fortunate today with the panels that we have joining us for this first session. I'm going to go down very briefly, introduce each of them to you, and then we are going to open it up. They'll each take about 10 minutes to present their ideas, findings, and share some of their experiences. And we're going to transition to some questions, answers, and discussion from our panel members, hoping largely to draw from many of your experiences and your insights. So please view this as a discussion. It is being recorded, so it is attributional. Keep that in mind. And we were told a little bit ago it would be on Facebook or on YouTube rather in the next week. And so we hope that the conversation is going to help chaplains and chapels and religious affairs specialists across the Army and perhaps the Joint Force. So to start with, I just want to introduce Chaplain Brad Cattleman, who joining us here. So Chaplain Cattleman is a student at the Command and General Staff College, and most recently served in Army Service Component Command as the command chaplain in a 2-star headquarters. He has a wide background of experience in special operations, but some unique experiences using social media in the form of creating content and spreading it online in the form of podcasts. So in some very creative and effective ways, he used a podcast throughout his command, geographically dispersed across multiple geographic combatant commanders, AOs, from CENTCOM to INDOPACOM, reaching these subordinate brigades that he would have a very hard time meeting in person by leveraging these podcasts that were sent out on their network, as well as hosted online using these Army systems that already existed. So taking what was available with no cost to his unit, was able to reach a much wider audience. He's done some research in podcasting and some other ways that it's been used, and so he's going to be talking a little bit about that today. But from us being from a similar generation, we're also a little less comfortable with using social media. So he offers some red team perspectives, I guess we could say, on concerns that many chaplains have and chapel communities have on the use of social media. Next, I want to introduce Drew. I had you in my notes next, so we'll go down in the middle and Chaplain Walker right after that. So Drew McGinley, very excited to have him because he's a brand new battalion chaplain and who just coming on active duty, but a wide range of experience in the Army with 11 and a half years in the Army prior to this, serving as a 13 Fox Forward observer. In his previous career, spent a significant amount of time in the Army Reserves as well, has a wide range of ministry experience in the local church, as well as in institutional settings as a chaplain. So he's done a lot of research and spent a lot of time looking at social media and ways that younger generations of soldiers interact with community and build community and maintain their relationships. So he's offering for us today that social media is an initiator and a sustainer of relationships in millennials and Gen Z. And lastly, but definitely not least, we introduce Chaplain James Walker, So James is coming to us from Fort Riley, also in his very first term in the Army, but wide range of experience, 15 years of pastoral ministry. Prior to coming in the Army, as a church planner, a worship pastor, and a stage of life pastor, working with kids, youth, young adults, wide range of experience, prior to coming to the Army, and also offering that millennials and Gen Z seek authentic community and relationships, so they often start in these online communities. So arguing and presenting for us that chapel services, chapel auxiliaries, UMT programming should and could incorporate social media into their philosophy of ministry in a way that will do more and reach more people. So a very brief introduction to our panel. And again, I'm by far the least important up here, but my name is Eric. I'm a student here at Command General Staff College, and Josh needs somebody to stand here and ask questions. So I will be facilitating some of the discussion. I've got a list of my own questions. Please feel free to interact with the panel. But I'm going to turn it over, starting with Brad. We'll go down. They've each got about 10 minutes to kind of share who they are, their experiences, as well as their main thesis and some of their research and writings.
Okay, Brad Cattleman. Eric actually taught me how to podcast, so don't pretend you can't pretend like he doesn't know what he's doing. I'll first share my perspective. I'm a little older than the folks we're trying to reach, like most of you. If I look around the room, I can tell most of you are a little older. Some like Steve are a lot older. And I'm distrustful of social media. I'll share that out. My wife and I do not share a lot on Facebook or any other social media platform. We're distrustful of it. I don't know where the source of that is, but there's a variety of reasons. So we're not comfortable with social media. But where I have used content creation or media creation to leverage for ministry is mostly in podcasts. Eric and I were deployed together. We had a geographically dispersed task force, and we were trying to figure out a way to reach folks who are very desk-oriented, who are driven, working 12 hours a day, aren't going to get up and leave their 12 to 16 hours a day, aren't going to get up and leave their desks to come to the chapel. So how do we reach out to those folks? That was a problem we're trying to reach. You know, how do we get to those folks versus being able to go like desk to desk to desk? You count the amount of people, there's not enough hours in the day, right? Not enough hours in the deployment. So we used a podcast to create a 10-minute devotional, send it out once a week. So here I am, I show up at the Service Deployment Distribution Command last year at Scott Air Force Base. It's 32 locations spread around the world, and I'm thinking, what tool can I use? I'm the only chaplain in this organization of 2,500 people spread around the world. How can I reach them in a way that's meaningful? Because in many ways it's superficial, right? I mean, there's no way I can call every person of that 2,500 people. I'm not also going to expect that, podcasting is the only thing I did. I also set area coverage for all those people. But figured out that, podcasting is one way to do that. And so we created a 10-minute devotional, and once a week we pushed it out to everybody in the command. We hosted it on DVIS, which is the Defense Video Information Directory. It's the DoD's way of putting out media. So we hosted it on DVIS. We also aggregated it in iTunes, so folks could look at it on their personal phones. Primarily people listen to it at work, though, through the SharePoint. We shared it on the internal SharePoint portal as well as posting it externally. So most folks listen to it internally. But basically what we did, so it was 10-minute. Sometimes it was interviews with folks in the command. Sometimes it was a devotional I put together. It usually went along with whatever's going on in the world, whatever's going on in the command. It's like if you're writing a sermon, you're not going to not talk about what's going on in the world. So that is how I used social media. I am not good at Facebook. If you look at my profile, you can see a picture of me fishing, and that's it. And but that is one way I've used media, I guess. I suppose we call it social. Okay, next.
I have a quick question for you. So what was your viewership rate, do you believe? Was there a way to track that, or did you get any feedback on it?
Okay, so SharePoint upgraded last year, and in the midst of establishing the podcast, they lost all the data and the ability to, and the ability to look at views. So I don't know. I do know that I did travel to a lot of locations around the world, and every time I went somewhere, one of the first things somebody said to me was, loving the podcast. And another benefit of it was, you know how if you stand in the pulpit and you talk a lot and you preach, people automatically assume they know you? And that can be both good and bad, right? But the good side of that is they already know you in a way. So I would show up and I already have, it was superficial at first, but I already had that first connection of a relationship established because they would know my voice and they would know my name and they'd been listening to podcasts so they knew me. So at least it established that initial, I didn't have to go around and people didn't figure out who I was because they'd seen emails or podcasts from me. Answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
So when will you have your XM channel?
I mean, XM is probably the wrong generation view.
You can probably share metrics from the task force, though.
I don't remember numbers. Sorry, I haven't.
So for let's say a joint task force around 2,000 people, we could track who you can actually see who listened to it. We didn't share that though, you know what I mean? But around 150 people a week for about 2,000 people that were accessing it and listening to it on a weekly basis.
Just more than what you get in the
That's more than what you'd see in the chapel.
I just listened to your message like 20 times, so those latest.
Yeah, dude. Steve drove the metrics up to me all the time.
Before you would play your podcast, did you have to legal Jack have to go see it, or did you have to review with you? Did somebody have to review your podcast before you sent it out?
That's a really good question. So I did get a legal review ahead of time before I ever started it. And so legal guidance was given to me. So we are allowed to put out whatever we want, considering the audience. The legal guidance was when I sent it to the command, I could advertise it in an email. As long as the email was not devotional in nature, but was more advertisement in nature, it was legal. And so when people then clicked on the link to listen to the podcast, that was consent to listen. Consent's a funny term. That was consent to listen to religious material. So as long as I maintain that, I would always put an advertisement of what the podcast was about. I might put what the main scripture was. I always put the main scripture. And then I always had a blurb at the bottom, this is religious in nature. And we had a mechanism for removing people who didn't want to get it.
So we're just jumping in with questions. So I had to do this at Oak, but we had two contractors who were millennials who ran this, so I basically just delegated this. What could you have done this outside of the Army platform? Meaning, you just described one of the reasons why I have a problem with going through the Army divids or anything else is because it's not nimble, it's not agile. It's very. Did you say it was easy to go through it, or no? So did you ever think about just having a labeling usual podcast label, doing everything, but just running it off of, I don't know how to run a podcast, so off of whatever, iTunes or Spotify or whatever.
Yeah, there's plenty of hosting ability out there. I have a computer science degree, so the computer stuff didn't bother me. But there are plenty of hosting platforms out there that are easy to set up, and it may take a small outlay of personal cash. Not cheap, that's why I went with the military system.
Okay.
The cheapest and freest is called Anchor, and it's an app that you can use.
So you didn't make the choice of using the Army systems based upon your command going, you're gonna
No.
this.
I did it because it was free.
Okay.
And already there. I mean, I had to talk to Divids a lot. They're still not set up to podcast well. But
Okay.
that's a good question. And there are a lot of there's a lot of easier options out there for hosting.
One of the major barriers to implementing any of the technologies you guys are going to talk about, though, is that if you're trying to reach people in the office at work, most of the necks have all sorts of filters and walls, and they're not all the same. And they don't even stay all the same within a quarter. There'll be a block here, but not a block here, and there'll be something that works for 6 weeks and then stops working. I applaud you for using divots, even if it was difficult, because people could access it from a government computer. But then you've got people who want to use their personal device, and so it's
So I did a
balance.
two-pronged approach. I did both internal on the SharePoint portal, and I did on Divids and iTunes. That's why. That's the only reason I did it on Divids, was trying to reach people outside of work. So I could share it with my mom.
All right, thank you, Brad. All right.
James and I co-wrote the paper talking about social media and how it's both an initiator and a sustainer of community for Generation Z and millennials. And the thing that I want to emphasize to you all is imagine just spending 15 to 30 minutes a day, and that you could drastically enhance the morale of your unit that you're a part of. You can help Army recruiting efforts and retention rates. You can promote the military in our community and put us in a good light. You can spotlight soldiers that typically would not get the spotlight. all with very limited stuff. And not only that, you can also influence them and model what it means to be a faithful follower of your faith tradition, and what it means to be a husband or a wife that honors their spouse or their community and all that kind of stuff. Just 15 to 20, 30 minutes a day. That's what social media gives and offers us. I come at this from both a marketing undergrad and prior to coming on active duty, working within information operations, theater information operations group. I do have the skill identifier P4, which is a tactical information operations planner, which is the info wars or inform and influence activities that the Army does. And so I can see both the negative and the positive of what images, words, and themes have in communities. And I know how the military leverages those in theater operations. But that stuff, the influence aspect of it happens anywhere and everywhere. And the question is, if we're not actively influencing in our communities, the question is, who is influencing? And what I want to ask you all is, everybody else, or what I want to put out there for us is that we have this awesome opportunity to influence our communities, not just in the physical realm, but as you alluded to, getting to every single desk throughout a work week, and depending on how spread out your unit is and all that stuff is extremely difficult. But one thing that every single person has is one of these. And statistically, we're talking about millennials and Generation Z. In our paper, we talked about some of the statistics, but you're looking at people, 90% of people use Facebook or one of Facebook's subsidiary apps, like WhatsApp or Messenger or Instagram. Of that demographic, 90% of people use it, and that is our soldiers. We live in a day and age where it's the postmodern mindset where narrative and story runs everything. And we have a story to share, but if we're not sharing it, they don't hear it. They want to know our story, and they want us to be a part of their story. Yeah, and we have the opportunity and the ability to be a part of that. We just need to rise above the fear of learning how to be a part of that. Our paper really focuses on the kind of concept of family systems theory, where every single person has a role within the family, and each person's input affects the other person as well. And through feedback loops and all that kind of stuff, basically through the web, every single time someone does something, the family changes as a whole as a result. And as chaplains and as military units, we are part of a large family, and whatever we put into that family will change it. We also talk about how there's the physical community, but there's the virtual community. Those of us that weren't born with a phone in our hands or a pad in our hands don't necessarily fully grasp how integral the virtual community is to these younger generations. And for them, the virtual community is just as real as the physical community, if not more sometimes. And what we do in the virtual community can have drastic effects in the physical community as well. So the way that we kind of like to look at it is kind of like a Venn diagram. You have the physical community, and then you have the virtual community, and there's overlap. They both affect each other. We talk about several different ways that you can leverage that to affect the individual soldier, but that affecting that one individual soldier affects the whole unit. If you look at it through the storytelling and narrative, and through that systems theory. A good example is on my Instagram account. That's the main thing that I use, but I use a lot of others as kind of, I guess, secondaries. But through Instagram, I have both my XO, my S3, I have several different sergeants, our sergeant major, the garrison Command Sergeant Major of JBLN follows me, and so when I take a photo of me and a soldier, a selfie, and I say, this soldier did an awesome job, Private Snuffy did an awesome job getting first place in our recent whatever, and I tag him in there, and then the Command Sergeant Major of the garrison says, great job on that. That soldier who would never have contact with our garrison Command Sergeant Major all of a sudden is affirmed by the lead enlisted NCO of our post. And he's also affirmed by our Command Sergeant Major, who may not know because he has 470 soldiers that he's taken care of as well. So now this guy's getting affirmed from multiple directions. And what do you think that's going to do to his work, his daily office work when he's at the office, his interactions with fellow soldiers, his feelings about the Army, what the Army has to offer, all that kind of stuff. That's the power of what we have at our fingertips if we learn how to leverage it and use it wisely. There's a lot of other things that we could talk about as well, but that's just a little snippet.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, so that's our paper. We kind of did it together. Drew's the brains. I'm the bronze. The beauty. But so my background is I'm new to Army. Army is really new to me, and it is Babylon to me. It's something totally foreign, but I'm loving it. My background is in Arizona. I kind of come from big church, I guess you could call it, and ministered there for, like you said, about 15 years. But my role there, what we noticed was if we want to communicate with, 10,000 people or more, how are you going to do that? And bulletins and newsletters and those type of things, if for people my age or younger, if it's not here, it doesn't exist, right? There's this thing called FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, it happens here, and if it's not here, if it's not digital, it doesn't exist. Like, if there's any takeaway, I think that's it right there. It just doesn't exist. So we kind of figured out we needed on our staff even, like we need a curator to be able to promote and use social media in a way that would be an effective tool, right, for communicating this is what we need. And you already see that probably in a lot of your social media, how that works. But what was really interesting for us, as we noticed, especially with millennials and Generation Z, is it's more than a tool. It really is community. It really is their friends. My first little Army experience, when we were at Jackson, you see these, enlisted soldiers, they're coming in for basic. And I actually read some research and some papers on this too, but when they take away their phone, you've taken away their life, right? I mean, every relationship, every connection, every network they have is through their phone. And when you take that phone away, you've pushed them emotionally to a place that they've not been, right? They're born with these phones in their hands. So they there is isolation, there is anxiety, there is depression. There's a lot of things that come from taking away that community that's virtual. I loved how he said in here that screens disciple. It's absolutely true. And that the relationships matter. So getting at the point where I want to get to on this just little introduction is in our church, we thought social media was a way to promote events, use it as a tool to get people to sign up, way to kind of share the bulletin, right? It's so much more than that. It is community. It's where they live. It's how they can talk to each other. It's how they relate to one another. It's massive. And so as a chaplain, or Christian chaplain, so to speak, discipleship's always organic. It's relational. It's one-to-one. We talk to each other face to face, and we care, and we can read to one another, or whatever. And I think that's true for a lot of people. But these next coming generations, there's an aspect of their person that's virtual, and if you're not speaking to them, discipling them virtually as well, you're not ministering to the whole person. And because of that, as a chaplain, you are seen as government property, you're institutional, and you're a service provided, right? But if you can connect to them on a social network level, now you're addressing the whole person. They see you as a person. the ministry is much deeper. And anyway, we can talk more about it, but that's kind of,
And going back to more than just a tool, and kind of going back to going deep and how much this can affect what you can do. So a couple of my posts have a reach of just like a 15-minute post that that I had to create, like taking a picture, doing some dialogue, had a reach of over 3,000 people. Over 3,000 individuals got to see this post. That's community people on the outside, military people on the inside, with over 10,000 impressions, that's how many times it was seen across people's feeds. So of those 3,000, if you average it out, each person saw it 3 times. So whatever message I was putting out with that particular thing, they saw it 1 time, but then it was reinforced 2 times as well. And if not more, depending on who had more impressions and so on and so forth. So I could use this as a discipling tool. I can use this as hey, this is what we did as a group. It was really awesome. You should come next time. As a form of advertising, because that's advertising without advertising, if you catch it. It's not saying come to my event, it's saying, hey, this was really cool, look at the fun that we had, we all have smiles on our face, you can come next time, make sure you sign up or something like that. But it could also be like the word of the week. I do a word of the week and I have my own hashtag. We can talk about what that means. That all my soldiers know. On my name placard on my door, underneath it has my social media stuff and the hashtags I use for our unit. So that way, I'm speaking their language in a way that they understand they can be a part of it. I ask questions and people respond, and I'll address those questions. Sometimes it's through direct messages like an email, sometimes it's publicly. But there's a lot of different things that you can do with it through the various platforms. But I think that gives a good basis if we want to go to questions.
I think we're ready, and we've got some 3 hands up. We can take the first one up here. Alan.
Yeah. Do you think with the growing use of technology and things, do you think that there's a possibility of it being losing that personal aspect of that one-on-one discipleship? I don't know. Just is there a trend of that going away?
I think the generations that have that view are my generation and older. The younger generations don't see that as a thing. Like James was saying, like when you take that cell phone away from someone from the younger generation, you're actually taking away a part of their identity, a part of who they are, and that collective narrative that they see themselves a part of. And so, yes and no. My generation, if you dated someone online and you got married to them, that was like kind of the taboo thing because not a lot of people are doing it. Nowadays, if you don't, like you're the oddball if online wasn't part of your dating relationship process and how you get there. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, well, just the reason that I asked that is just because me being in the youth ministry and stuff, we were noticing like when we were trying to teach the kids, they weren't necessarily paying attention to us because they were paying attention to their phones. And then when we would take them away during class or when we would go to camp for a week, they didn't have their phones for a week, and we found out that the kids were actually learning, were actually engaging with one another rather than just their phones. And so, do you think that there needs to be a healthy balance between the digital age and making sure that we're having
in our
personal
paper we
interaction?
talk about that we're not saying go virtual only and negate this stuff, but take the two and sync them together.
Right.
Utilize them, like leverage the community that's virtual to amplify your physical community. So instead of saying, and I'm not saying you can't take away phones, I think there's a time and place for that, but instead of just always taking away phones, maybe shoot out questions, choose an app where you can use engagement based off of what you're trying to learn, so you can leverage that and let their language to feed into what you're trying to do as well.
I love the example though of we take them to camp and then they don't have their phones and at first they freak out. They're like, what? And then once you get them off the bus and they're all playing together or doing whatever, it's like magic happens, right? Like we're real people and get to connect and hang out. So yeah, we're definitely advocating for it's both. It's almost like you don't get the physical if you don't have the virtual as well. They're just so intertwined that just to have one you're wrong. You have to have both.
And I would say this, if you do take them away and they are having fun, take pictures of it for later, so that you can use it as a way to say, hey, the proof that they did have fun, even though you took away my social, there's a picture that you put that they can then tag and then share with their friends, like, hey, I did have a fun time at camp, even though I didn't have social media, but there's a picture here to prove that I did have fun.
Yeah, social skills are important, right? You know, you want people to be able to shake hands, look them in the eye, have a conversation. Those skills are just as important as the virtual.
Before we jump into these next questions, we've talked about online community. We've said online real community, online real community. So for our audience out there in the virtual world, can you just define for us what is online community and is it actual community? So if we can establish a baseline there, and then we'll go back to the question.
I would say that online community, virtual community is just as real in the minds of Generation Z and millennials as is physical community. And I'd say even myself, I have friends that I've never met face to face that I talk to on a regular basis, and I would consider them close friends. There's a guy, he's just became a Navy chaplain. He's part of my denomination. His name's Dan Morrison. I've known him for several years through online interactions. And I got to meet him at our endorsers conference just this 2 months ago for the first time. We went out to lunch, hung out, sat next to each other, and we come from totally different walks of life, different cultures, all that kind of stuff. But we had this relationship for a long time through social media, and that is the norm for the younger generations. Whether it's through Facebook stuff, maybe it's online gaming. There's people that game regularly with other people that they've never met, but they're a team and they have shared objectives, shared goals, and shared experiences. I mean, that's what community is, right? A lot of that stuff. And that's what social media offers in a lot of different ways in these virtual communities.
I see it way more in, not so much on Facebook, but more in like the stories, like in Instagram stories, Snapchat, and WhatsApp. Like, you know, it's funny, like ourselves and some members out here, we're Chibolik together, right? You know, basic officer leadership course. And we still have this WhatsApp group chat that I would call online community, just that group chat. You know, there's always group text, they're happening amongst circles of friends, and they're always communicating, relating. WhatsApp is another one that works really well, and you know, we got, how many people would you say in that group? There's probably 30 people in it, and we still interact on a daily basis in there. We've had another chaplain whose father just passed away, and I cried, you know, and so I'm texting and relating to her through that. We had another chaplain that's up there where he's at, just prevented a suicide, a guy jumping off a bridge, and we got that posted there, and you know, and everyone's interacting and engaging in that. So there's all these real life things happening, and the way we all talk about it and get together to experience it together happens virtually because of distance or time or the pace of life. So it's, yes, can you take the next step and be more personal and make a text, maybe further a call, maybe in person? Yeah, all those things are definitely good things. I think we're just advocating like the online community is almost like the initiator, sustainer. It's really where the ball's turning.
Yeah, that's good.
I think, yeah, we'll switch to this gentleman.
So, I have the demeanor of Brad, and then I'm suspicious of social media, but the reality I also understand, so I'm actually very much in favor of all of this, is this is the future. This is like pushing back against print or the book, right? It's gonna happen whether you want it to happen or not. So I think this is super important. Here's my question for you. What happens when you PCS? And what I mean is you establish this great form of communication for your unit. Let's say you're part of a chapel, and then you PCS, and then it kind of, you know, it dies. So what is the sustainment plan? And this is what we're struggling with at Fort Campbell, is what's the basic minimum so that anybody can come in behind and sustain it and do it? And realistically, is that even possible? Because if you have somebody who's not, you know, the other part of this question is how do you mitigate risk? So for example, your Sergeant Major story. I can see you're trying to help out a soldier, you know, Joe or Jane, they're doing something awesome. You take a picture, you post it, it's cool, and you get the Sergeant Major that's like, his patch is like 1 inch candid to the left. How dare you do that? I mean, Chaplain, you're making us look bad, blah, 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 blah. Has that ever happened? What do you do to get people on board? Did you have to sell it to your chain of command? So how do you sustain it? How do you sell it to your chain of command?
I think sustaining is just like physical communities, right? When we PCS, we lead that group and we maintain some communication, some relationships with those people, but not everybody. And we have to develop new relationships with the new people at our new station. And I'd say it's probably the exact same way in social media. Like, I still have relationships with some of the people I worked at some of my churches through social media. Other ones have kind of died off over time just because it just hasn't worked, it just hasn't continued. Those, the new pastors in some of those roles have their own social media accounts and have developed things that way. So I think my responsibility is for where I'm at. Like when I get to the new duty station, I need to go back and rebuild all those things. And I would say whoever follows in my place has that same responsibility. Ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to social media. So if they aren't trained on it, they need to learn how to do that. And I think that's what this is kind of about, is that we all need to become students of our culture and learn the language of our soldiers, so that way we can minister to them, right? And so if we're not students of our culture, then we're going to be missing opportunities. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting at, sir, is if we leave and someone comes in, if they're not proactive in building relationships through the social media spectrum, then they're missing out on an opportunity. I can do the best I can and kind of give them, like, you know, in my handoff and say, this is some of the stuff I've done, this is my success, you should try to implement some of this, but it's up to them to really follow.
So this would be my challenge for any chaplain under the age, because I'm like super old, under the age of 35 or 40 who's doing this, right? So I want to start using Twitter for our chapel next to communicate, because bulletins don't cut it, et cetera, et cetera. Have an SOP, have a generic Twitter handle so that it's, you know, Fort Campbell Chapel Next. And then at least have, like, I know if I'm going to start this, I need to write stuff down now instead of just like what we usually do. Here are the keys, here's a Twitter handle, good luck.
Right.
You know, no 10 commandments of social media, you know, curate, stay relevant, you know, update, da-da-da-da. That's what's going to be needed for the captains and majors to change and to help, you know, what I would call the people who block progress a lot of times, which are the lieutenant colonels, to be like, you know, this isn't that hard. Oh, I can do this. You know, the reward is better, you know, is a payoff for the risk that you have by you know, putting yourself out there. So,
and I think that's where things like hashtags come in. You could do like really focus on hone in on a hashtag that you leave with your unit. So my unit's the Warhawks, and so all of my hashtags that I have on my door for like our UMT events will say Warhawks UMT events or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but I have 3 or 4 things, Warhawk word of the week. It's a long hashtag, but anyone that wants to follow that and look back at past word of the weeks, they can look at the short, 30-second video that I posted, so on and so forth. So I think that kind of hits some of that continuity that you're speaking of too. Like, you can give them that hashtag. I'm not going to be posting Warhawk word of the weeks when I'm at a new unit that's the Reapers or something like that. So
one thing I wanted to mention too is, like you said, the generic Twitter handle or handle for the chapel itself, which is probably a good thing, but there's so many platforms for social media, and what'll be interesting is once you kind of start getting into the water of it and you look at the analytics, you might see, I don't have any Twitter followers. Or you might say like, wow, like Instagram, when I post a picture of this ministry happening, everyone loved it. And you start seeing the analytics and you start seeing the trends of what's really working and what's not. And you kind of want to cater to your audience, right? Who it is, that. Anyway, that was kind of 2 cents.
This is a nice way of saying Twitter is not used by young people.
I don't think Facebook is either. Is it Instagram? Is it completely Instagram?
Insta and Snap are probably your 2 biggest.
Okay.
That's
what I thought. I mean, Facebook is like for my mom.
Right.
I call it a hub. It's a hub station.
We're going to go to Chaplain Taylor next for questions. We'll have time to answer everyone's questions.
I was just gonna say, first of all, I thank you guys for having this panel and for being good evangelists and advocates for social media. and then to confess as an old guy that I have looked at social media as a tool to serve the in real life experience. And what I'm coming aware of, even sitting here, is that I think we have been missing an entire domain of ministry. And some of you have already unlocked that and are in the process of unlocking that. But truly, being a parent of a couple of boys that are almost 20 years old, you know, I see this the same as we see with our soldiers. I also see that there are times when, with my own sons, I have to tell them, you know, no, watching a service online is not the same as going and having community with people in reality. How do you all bridge that divide and help encourage people? Because one of the reasons that the social media and the devices are so attractive is because you can show what you want to show and not show that real downcast spirit that you have, and not show the real you necessarily through those platforms. So how do you encourage people to engage with others in real life experience in the midst of using social media?
I don't think it's any different than real life in that people always present their face first. They present what they want first. You walk into iChapel, you're not going to necessarily see people showing their true selves until you get to know them one-on-one. It's the same way with media. It's not, I don't think it's any different. It takes time and work, just like real relationships.
You don't think it's easier to hide on social media than it is?
I think maybe like in your straightforward Facebook kind of deal, like yeah, people tend to put their vacations, their food, their celebrations. In Snap and Insta, especially the stories, like even Snap and Insta can be a little polished sometimes, especially Snap. Snap is silly, like, you know, there's like dog ears and noses and people making silly faces. You get like emotion there, and you get, especially in Insta stories, which there's like 200 million users a month on that, putting out stories. It's tons, but it's informal, it's unpolished, and you get a tone, you get a vibe, you get a feel of more of that, not necessarily your best foot forward, but you do get to know the soldiers or people better. I think anyway, I think it's both. And then to the other thing you're mentioning of, you know, you can't just watch the service online, like, you know, it kind of goes back to the idea, like, you do want them to have good social skills, you want them to be able to shake hands, you want to be able, our faith is one of a community, right? You know, so it is a community. It's just the virtual thing's so new and kind of different, and that's, you know, not how I grew up, so it's different, but it's so genuine and authentic for them. You're just stepping into their waters, right? And so I think we do, it's both and. So the kind of stuff like I like to post, you know, when we highlight a soldier, or we're highlighting, like, we're gonna have pizza at the next Bible study, or little things like that make it winsome in the sense of, we kind of talked about like even these things called like pop-up events, right? So I'll take like a little selfie video on Insta and say, hey guys, I'm gonna buy the next 10 cups of coffee at Starbucks at, you know, 1 a.m. or whatever, time at the PX, and hey, so see you there, right? And you might not have 10 show up, you might have 2 the first time or something like that, but then it becomes winsome and attractive, right? And but you've actually taken the virtual community and brought it into a physical realm where you can relate that way. So I think part of being intentional with your virtual community is getting it balanced, right? You are pushing out content, you are pushing out stuff that you want them to have for, you know, their relationship with God and each other, that community, but at the same time, you're using the virtual to push them back to the physical as well, to gather and be together. That's all.
Yes.
I understand that for some of us here, we're going to understand some of the social media tools, but practically we may just not implement it, and that's okay. Can you guys develop maybe a checklist, or what are some things that some of us can do to see leaders in our parishes, our chapels, our communities that we can maybe develop to handle social media? Or, you know, how would we go about developing a social media coordinator or team?
I think the Army has a great resource. I can't remember the title of it, but the handbook that you sent us.
Yeah. There's an Army handbook that I believe the proponent is Public Affairs. on social media use, so for organizationally and
Yeah,
all this
for organizationally, and I think that has a lot of good stuff in it for just in general. Talks a lot about OPSEC and how to ensure that we do OPSEC, because that's really huge and a fear for a lot of people when it comes to social media. So we have to be conscious about what we're posting when, and like locations, things like that nature. But it has a lot of that stuff in there. I think what James and I are like, there's the organizational chapel aspects, the podcasting, which is kind of more organizational in nature, at least the way that you did it, sir. And then there's the what we're talking about is more of the personal, and so you're not going to necessarily have someone else do that for you. I mean, I guess there's some like really big, what they call influencers out there that have people that do that, but you know, I'm not going to have someone get on there and post things for me or do that stuff for me. I do know of some churches, but the way that the algorithms work for Facebook and Instagram is the more likes, the more comments that it gets, the more it shows up in other people's feeds. So if you have like good content that people enjoy and they like it, then it's going to pop up in other people's feeds more often. And we do know churches that have teams that they call social media teams. Someone puts something out and they send out, hey, we just put out this post, and they have 50 people automatically go like it, so it starts getting in other people's
And
feeds.
comment, and you know, like,
Yeah, and comment and stuff like that on it too, because Facebook wants you, and Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, they want you to keep coming back and looking at their stuff. So if something is popular, they're going to put that in other people's feeds more often because they want you to be entertained, right? So there's that. I think one thing that I'd like to mention that I think is really important is, and I think there's a lot of fear because we've seen social media used very poorly by well-known people in politics and sports, all over the place, private groups on Facebook, all that, is we're not advocating for you to be a consumer necessarily of social media, but a practitioner. And my prior job before coming on to active duty, I was a prison chaplain for Washington State Corrections, and the drug dealers would always say the best drug dealers were the people that didn't use their product, but just sold it. And I think that's that same kind of concept when it comes to social media. Is we're not trying to say like jump on and get on the political bandwagon on whatever side you are and posting a bunch of stuff, getting in words of a war of words over ideas. What we're saying instead is add value to the individuals in your community and make them feel loved, appreciated, and known. Like that was one of the things that Mr. Kinnaman talked about, that people want to know, am I valuable? And that's what we're kind of advocating for. And through that, then all of a sudden they have buy-in to who you are because they know that you love them. And maybe I haven't done a selfie with this Joe over here, but he's seen me do it with other random people, and rank isn't a discriminator, race, sex, religion, none of that stuff is a discriminator in my selfies with them. But they see that I love all these different Joes, and the Joes aren't necessarily doing anything to earn my love. Then they know that I'll love them too. And I think that's what we're really advocating for. And that's why it's not a tool, but it's really being a part of the community. It's not everyone knowing everything about me, but it's me knowing about them, right? If that makes sense.
And you'll be surprised what you see, right? Like it'll be like, somebody's name, it'll be like God first, period, pray hands. And then like the stuff that's on their wall, you're like, whoa, like, but it gives you a lot of talking points too, though. So next time you're in your battle rhythm, you go around, you're like, hey, how was that wedding you were at last weekend? Or hey, I saw you and your family went, on a trip to Europe or wherever, like it's automatic icebreakers when you're walking through the motor pool and talking to guys, and they're like, oh yeah, I got to do this. So it builds connection and relation, and you're sharing stories, and so it just moves you on this pendulum of like, I'm government property to like, I'm a real person and care about you.
To answer your question about social media, the Army has just go army.mil/social media. There's like 20 publications that update all there if you want to, for folks who want to go there, it's pretty competent.
Yeah, Google search will
Thank
throw
you.
that smash on it.
So first, just before anyone implements this, there is an Army policy on online conduct.
Right.
Just to review that. So I think you started to answer my questions, or the one in the middle. My question was, do you all separate your chaplain profiles from your personal profiles, or are they following the person, or are they following the chaplain?
For me personally, I have 2 Insta accounts. One's a lot of my friends and family, I don't care about everything I do in the Army every day. And then I have this other one that's more just chaplain stuff, you know. And, so I do have 2 accounts for that. Facebook, I just have one, because I just the way I like to use it or whatever. But 2 accounts on Insta for me.
For me, I have one Instagram account, and it's a public figure Instagram account. And the reason why I switched from personal to a business account is because I can see analytics of my demographics that are looking at my stuff, what they like, how they like it, all that kind of stuff. And I did the same on Facebook. So, like, I can tell how many shares something got and how many people saw it, how many times it was seen, the age group, sex, location in the world. So I can tell, you know, it's ISIS or, you know, Russia type thing, and you know, that type of stuff. So I made that switch. I approach it more holistically. We live in a world that we compartmentalize everything. I want them to see me as a pastor that loves my family, loves my community, has real struggles, has a real life, that I'm a real person. And so I kind of just said, this is everything. Now, at the same time, I don't like, I just don't like throw everything out there, but I'm very intentional about what I put on, if that makes sense. So.
Next question. Yes, sir.
So, for disclosure, I married my wife. We met online back when people were like, couldn't you just go to Virginia Beach to a bar and meet the old-fashioned way? So I'm not against this.
Yeah.
The challenge that I have is so like my battalion's been fighting for 12 months with the PAO to get a Facebook page. You know, and then when they finally are like, oh yeah, you got a Facebook page, but nobody follows Facebook anymore, you need to get it. So in listening to what you're saying, it sounds like your success comes from using predominantly a personal account. At what point do we run into an issue, though, where the Army says your personal account is an official account? Does that make sense? And you get into all of this, because like my chapel community page on Facebook is run by my parish life coordinator. And so we just official stuff. And I think we've been able to, because it's a chapel specific program, fly under some of the radar, if you will. But now I follow you at your battalion, I can't just assume your identity. So what's the makeup time now for all of your followers to become my followers and build this public page and all this other stuff? Does that make sense? So how did you go from starting from scratch to where you are? Because that, in a sense, has to repeat itself now everywhere you go, or whoever replaces you.
But that's, in many ways, that's no different than what you would do in real life. You still have to go around and meet everybody. You still have to go visit where they work. You still have to go see them. It's just an analog and virtual. I don't know that it's
Yeah, just
different.
like if you were to start a podcast anywhere else, you'd still have to let
Build
everyone know.
viewership,
Yeah.
build listenership.
But you still may retain some of those people, and you might get word of mouth even from those people. Hey, your new chaplain's pretty cool, like he does this or something like that. I don't know.
And
So,
I think if you've already built a network, I mean, that network, you know, like, they're all connected online, right? So it's easier to rebuild the network when you follow somebody who's been doing it.
definitely. Does that answer your question?
It does,
Okay.
but I guess maybe that's where some of the more senior people in the room, at what point does our personal profile then become, for lack of a better term, a public profile, and the Army says, hey, you know, you're no longer speaking as you know, whatever your first name is on your profile, you're now Chaplain McGillen of such and such unit, and you're crossing whatever line. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I have a question to challenge that. I'm United Methodist. Who's your endorser, just so curious?
Roman Catholic.
I'm not allowed to post anything online as United Methodist that would cross United Methodist lines.
Right.
Because I'm ordained in United Methodist Church. I'm not saying different for you. There is no distinction between personal and professional for United Methodist clergy.
But the things that I would post as a Roman Catholic priest to my page
Might
would
not
be different than what I would post as a chaplain generic one each. serving my battalion.
So the way that I push back against that is I'm doing what I would do if I was a pastor, a youth pastor, a college pastor, a senior pastor at a church, or if I was, even when there was periods of time when I wasn't a pastor, I'm doing the same stuff. I'm doing life with my friends and my people I'm ministering to. And so I'm not really advertising. I'm kind of throwing stuff out occasionally like, hey, we're gonna be doing this, it'd be awesome if you come join us. But I'm not saying, here's what we did, and, like the PAO serves a purpose and it's awesome, but it's very sterile in a lot of ways for that reason, right? It's a government entity, and this is just Drew. And so that's my kind of way I approach it. That's why I have my family and stuff on there too, right? I want to model what it means to be a Christian husband to people that have maybe never seen it.
And to clarify, so that we do understand, for, again, any audience out there, there are multiple documents that govern online conduct for soldiers. The Chief of Staff of the Army has a policy letter for online conduct for all soldiers, not just for units. And then Public Affairs has a handbook that is very thorough on how units can establish, or organizations, not just units, which also applies to chapel communities, should manage social media accounts. So all soldiers fall under social media policy, and you can establish unit, organizational, chapel, auxiliary accounts that then fall under this policy.
And with that being said, the way I do my own account would be vastly different than the way I would do a chapel account because of the differing policies, and that's just being a student of the medium that you're working within, and yeah.
I'm going to go back to your shirt and we'll get you next.
I have a comment, and I just want to say, like, with the social media, you do have to be careful, like even with your personal, because like we had a problem, and the chaplain posted then his frustrations to his community, and even though it's your page, you're still friends with this chaplain. They might go tell this, then you're on the red carpet of the sergeant major's office.
Right.
I mean, it happens. So so you do have to be careful too. And then my other comment was, I keep hearing people say Facebook isn't anymore, but anytime an event happens, I'll be like, where's the event? They'll be like, check it out it's on Facebook, you can find it. So I tend to disagree when people say Facebook isn't a big thing anymore, because like even for me, like if a soldier asks me something, I'm like, go look at their Facebook page and you'll find out. And so I think Facebook still is like very popular.
I would say it's real popular for what you just said, like notifications, information, but it's not as popular for like the community aspect of what we're talking about. The connection. That's what I think we're.
Like as a chapel, you better have a Facebook page, but people aren't necessarily going to interact with the.
It's still 90% of people are using it, but it's for information.
It might be helpful for you guys to differentiate between push and pull technologies and interactive technologies. Stuff that's hung somewhere that people can get to versus stuff that is interactive in real time.
Yeah, I think, sir, what you said is very true. And that's where it goes back to not being a consumer, but being a practitioner, kind of thinking that I'm never going to vent my frustration with anybody or anything on it because it's not the proper place, right? And like you said, it could get me in trouble. And I don't want to model that I don't want my Joes like venting and saying stuff that's wrong, and getting them in trouble, because we all know that how people perceive us, whether it's virtually or physically, that affects our interactions, right? And so I don't want to set them up for failure by modeling something that's not good. With push and pull stuff, or posting things like you said, that there's different platforms serve different purposes, right? We have a list of all these different things up there, like you have WhatsApp that he talked about, which is basically like a group text type app that Facebook owns. Facebook is a little bit of everything depending on how you use it and how your community uses it. You have Instagram, which is sharing photos with some text, and now it's using short stories that last only 24 hours, that are only a minute long. You can do like live videos of stuff that you're doing that's longer. Snapchat is similar. Instagram and Snapchat are right now in a battle because they kind of do the same thing. Instagram started it, but Instagram's kind of stealing the video feature, the short-lived video. Pinterest is sharing your hobbies and things, pictures that you find interesting. of other things.
That site's blocked.
That site's blocked. And that's the other thing. A lot of this stuff you might not be able to do on your government computer, but everyone has a computer in their pocket. So figuring out where your soldiers are at and learn how to use it to your advantage to build community is kind of what we're talking about. So, sure.
I'd like to point out that in the 1960s, there was a social media called amateur radio, and that is where I met my wife. Now, I have a question with regard to video. You see, you spoke about selfies. Are you seeing more transition more to video versus stills? And then how do you be able to, like, we always talk about get your slides turned in. Well, that's a still. So how are you going to be able to transition to show your video in these kinds of situations?
I mean, there's a couple different, like you can take the video and then you can save that video if you like. You don't have to, but it's definitely the craze is these little short snippet videos on these different platforms, and it really is how things happen. But to answer your question, yes, like you could take that video and you're like, I need this for something else. You can just download it and save it to your phone to use elsewhere if you need to.
Yes, so back to your point that you were talking about as far as pitfalls with responses and not wanting soldiers to, get into a spiraling conversation and all. Like, how do you safeguard from that? Do you have any examples that you have used where, I just find that people comment, especially if you might have a comment on, like with a good marriage and what a good husband, looks like, or what a good wife looks like, those kind of things. And then you have a soldier who comments about how horrible his wife is and how much they really need counseling. And, your 10 to 15 minute thing that you put on, that you spend a day ends up being, well, is anybody checking any of those responses? Is anybody following through with any of those things? And just like a super simple, we had a Chapel Next Facebook post, and somebody who used to be a soldier at Fort Campbell saw it, and just my husband happened to be doing announcements that day, and he was like, oh, hey, I know that chaplain, he used to be mine, and I was like in a really bad accident, I'm in the hospital, can he come see me? Well, if nobody was like checking that at all, like we didn't look at that, Kurt didn't look at that, he wasn't, and so he had no idea that he needed to go and see somebody who was no longer even in the military, but who was still living in the area. Those kind of, lasting things that maybe your 10 to 15 minutes in the day doesn't cover. Can you address that?
You got to curate this. And I'm just telling you, you better curate it if you have an official, or even it's your personal one that's official. Because if you don't, there is crazy out there, and everybody captures this.
Yeah.
So blocking, you just can't post stuff and not, like I know our Facebook, it's like a 30-minute turnaround if there's a comment or something like that. Because if you don't, I would argue, and disagree, that's a vulnerability.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because you're going to get, like I said, there's crazy out there. I just know that up at DA level, we were building up numbers, but we were always having to skim off,
right.
The folks who, I'm not going to, they're troublesome.
Right.
Right. And the other thing I do want to stress too is, if you wear this uniform at any time, you do not have a personal social media account. Because the Army social media policy applies to you even on your personal stuff. And I think a lot of soldiers don't understand that.
Right.
So I just want to make sure everybody, that's clear. That's at least at the DA level understanding of social media.
In our paper, we have a website that we link to that has a lot of that stuff, that has information. Also, the handbook that we mentioned has stuff for both public and personal use, what the Army expects of us. So, but yeah, I think going to what you mentioned is we need to make sure that we are, like I said, in 15, 30 minutes you can change the unit, right? But that it doesn't end there, right? Just like our relationship, doing the word of the day at the Cub or at the motor pool, we're not done being chaplains for the rest of the week. We still have to be actively involved. Soldiers might come up to us and talk to us. They might use cuss words, things like that. That might happen on social media. We have to be prepared to be present in both places. And that's what we're talking about in being relational it's an actual community. It's not just a host something and leave environment. There's a place for that, but not, that's not what we're advocating for necessarily. So.
Sure.
The disclaimer statements on our Facebook pages. Now, what does that disclaimer statement really cover as far as people posting there? What are we held accountable for? Because I'm hearing that some of the stuff that people are saying that maybe we should respond to it. Some of the stuff that people are saying maybe we should just block this person. So with the disclaimer statement, that I'm thinking from my study, that all Facebook pages on the government websites have to have disclaimer statements stating, this content that's coming through here, we're not liable for any of these kind of things. So how are we held liable, and what are some of the stuff out there that, that we should be looking for that maybe this disclaimer statement doesn't cover?
I don't know if you guys, I've been talking a lot, do you guys want to add? I can add some. So I would say, again, going back and looking at, especially the handbook that we referenced, it really does spell out what is expected of the individual versus what's expected of an organizational Facebook page or other social media. And a lot of these different things, there is no place to put a disclosure. So if you are doing it as like Snapchat does not have an organizational or a place where you could put a disclaimer if you wanted to, if you're using it organizationally. Instagram, you have like maybe 140 characters on your profile page that you could maybe do that with. The way that I operate to make sure there's nothing on there, if anything seems too personal, going back to what you said, or inappropriate, then I delete it and I direct message the person and said, hey, this thing is like maybe too personal, let's connect one-on-one. Do you want me to meet you at my office, or what's your schedule look like? Because the world doesn't need to see people's dirty laundry, especially when they're asking for help. Maybe they don't realize they can send you a direct message that's private, just like email, that type of thing. And if it's abusive or offensive or whatever, then I'll delete it and just tell them I had to delete this because it doesn't meet the standard, basically, in a loving pastoral way.
Part of what we discussed kind of planning for this panel that we realized we're not really addressing, though, as Chaplain Wainwright mentioned, there are risks that need to be managed and mitigated, some of which we're not addressing. There are cyber threats out there. There's threats of spoofing our accounts once he becomes a well-known chaplain, and then
I've already had his
some guy named Ivan has got his name online. So there definitely are some concerns that kind of go beyond what we can actually fix or do. If you're using this as a platform with knowledge, we thought about inviting somebody in that's a cyber expert or cybersecurity expert, but found like we could get down that rabbit trail very quickly. But it's important for users to know that there are risks that extend just beyond what somebody else posted on your wall, but to opening yourself up as a publicly well-known individual that we've seen some other chaplains run into and have issues. There was another hand up out here. Somebody had another one.
Can I address
Yeah,
that?
please do.
So prior to me, I said earlier that I was a Washington State prison chaplain. For the 2 years that I was doing that before I came on active duty, I shut down all my social media because I'm working with people every single day that are murderers and organized crime type situation and want to leverage anything they can to manipulate you into getting cell phones, drugs, so on and so forth. They'll make a quick phone call and they'll let you know your home address, because they know your name. They'll have a buddy do their own digging and research. And so I went completely off. And going back to that risk, the people I was ministering to at the time did not use social media, so I didn't really see the need to be a part of it the way that I am now. My people that I'm ministering to, I can minister face-to-face and through email with the people that are of my generation and older and not have to worry about the social media stuff. But when it comes to the younger generations, it's a huge segment of their life that I can't afford to not be a part of. And so I reinstated it. But if your position calls for you to, if you're at that kind of level of risk, then maybe social media isn't for you at that kind of capacity. Or maybe if you are someone that's higher ranking and you don't have a lot of, junior enlisted, or junior officers in your ranks, maybe social media isn't for you, but maybe you could still be an advocate for it for those that are ministering at that level, or maybe having the Army focus more on that stuff. One of the things that we talked about organizationally, when it comes to like chapels, we both come from being a part of fairly decent churches that have younger generations. You go to chapel today, the only way you can give to the CTOP funds is through cash or a check, right? All my churches, all my giving that I've ever done probably for the last 5 to 10 years has been online or through texting, right? And that's the young generation. You're not gonna get them bringing cash to church to donate at a chapel. And so it's larger than just like Instagram, but it's kind of re-looking at how the world communicates at the younger level so that we can bring them in and it's not foreign to them. We can speak their language. In our paper, we talked about Paul at Mars Hill. He quoted pagan poetry, alluded to pagan gods as a way to share the gospel to those around them. And we are living in Babylon today. We need to speak the language of Babylon, but keep the message of our faith tradition.
Drew, another question for you that some of us in the audience may be able to identify with and perhaps respond to yourselves. But through some informal polling of chaplains going into this panel, we asked some chaplains why they wouldn't use social media. One of the common concerns was a projection or maybe a perception of self-promotion, which is counter to the values of our core. Generally, in our Army, we generally bristle at others that appear to be promoting themselves, their ministry, how awesome they are. So this was a concern that came up from multiple individuals that were formally polled. How do you respond to that?
For me,
So I don't use a lot of social media for that reason, because I'm the wrong generation, but I know I'm missing out. Go ahead, you probably have a better answer.
No, that's great. I'm one of those kind of people, like, I don't really like you taking a photo of me anyway, you know? Or, so I'm kind of, it's funny, I'm shy, I would say, social media wise anyway. I'm not a selfie person or anything like that, but I know I have to put myself out there a little bit, and I feel way more comfortable taking a picture with a soldier or a group of people or whatever. And honestly, when you look at the analytics of that anyway, honestly, you're not that cool. Like, nobody really wants to see you and what you're doing anyway. What they really want to see is you highlighting somebody. That's winsome. That's really what's going to win the day. So when you're looking at your analytics and you say, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so are doing this for our kids in our chapel service, they're awesome volunteers. We love them. They're just doing a great job. When you look at analytics, those are the kind of posts that people like and that are looking at and checking out. They're not checking out pictures of your selfies in the gym or something like that. Like, nobody cares. But so for me, I'm coming from, I think, a natural disposition of, I don't want my social media to be about me. It's really about being a practitioner of it and lifting others up. And maybe I'm in a photo or two with the group or whatever, but it's not really about me. If that makes sense.
So I'll say a part of my view of social media is driven by a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, and he cusses a lot, so if you look up any of his stuff, just be prepared to hear a lot of cuss words. But he wrote a book talking about social media a while back, and it's called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And he's looking at it from a business perspective, but in that book, what he means by jab, he's looking at social media in the form of giving, right? Or from a business. I'm looking at it as a way of ministry, but his idea of jabbing is you give, and then ask. Most people try to use social media from a business perspective as ask. They're going for the right hook every time. And I think in ministry too, that's kind of how we oftentimes use social media or think of it. We're trying to get people to do things every single time. We're always going for the right hook. We're not trying to give. And I think one with the self-promotion thing that people may be fearful of is if we're really out there trying to add value to people and give them and love them through our social media, then there might be a few people out there that don't like it and might think we're trying to self-promote or what have you, but I know my Joes are gonna feel loved and their lives are gonna be changed, and that's why I put this uniform on anyways, and made this route. But if we give, then I think that that's gonna be a less of a chance for that perception to happen.
Another little example of that, to kind of go back to the VBS or Sunday school volunteers example, like that post versus like, hey, these are our volunteers and they're awesome. It's winsome, it draws in attention, you want to be a part of that team. But if you post like, we have a need, the right hook, like, hey, volunteers needed, or there's no Sunday school this week, you know, like, how many people sign up for that, you know? Very few, you know, like, very loving people do, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not as winsome as you're highlighting who is volunteering, who is making a big deal. So if it's the give, highlighting all the people in the ministry that are doing things, there's something winsome about that draws other people to want to be a part of it, versus if you're going for the right hook and saying, take, you know, like, hey, we need this from you, we need this from you, and that's much less engagement going on there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a portion of sharing who you are, and there could be some of that stuff that maybe kind of can be seen as self-promotion, but if the majority of your stuff is give, then I think that you'll end up not having to worry about that too much.
And another answer to that is, you're always gonna get people who resist.
Yeah.
And if we take what the gentleman in there said, okay, we have a chapel service and it's excellent, that's great. That's an hour, 15 minutes, an hour every week. How can we reach, how can Chapel Next or Campbell reach everybody during the week as they're spread out? So culture change is hard. I would just say that there's gonna be risks, however, it's a way to communicate, really. And it's value neutral. So the people who resist it or don't use it, they're just not adapting. I mean, as someone who's an introvert, not gonna share, you know, all that stuff, you can still get across your information, your plan, your communications, without focusing on yourself, like you all said, highlighting soldiers. So I don't even see if somebody has, I think that's a legitimate response, like it's there. I don't see how it's, you know, how there's content to it. Because just don't have pictures of yourself. Just show cool stuff, happy stuff that's, you know, going on.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm just telling you, everybody under 35 uses, well, I guess they don't use Twitter anymore, use Instagram. But it's Twitter or Instagram. I mean, that's what they do.
Oh, yeah.
For me, it's the return investment's worth the risk. I mean,
Right,
from
exactly.
a business perspective.
And I like your practitioner. That is a good, I'm gonna totally borrow that. That's a good way to look at it. Not a consumer, but a practitioner. It's a good way to kind of frame it for folks who might be reluctant.
And I think it's the same thing with whether it be podcasts or anything, right? We need to be very, like, intentional on how we use this stuff. It's kind of like physical fitness, right? And eating. A lot of people eat food because it tastes good, and food does taste good, but we also need to be intentional on how we eat food, or else we're going to be unhealthy. And I think it's the same way with social media. We can consume it because it's, you know, I enjoy doing the things I do on it, but I'm very intentional so that way I don't overindulge, right? I'm not trying to be a consumer, I'm trying to be a practitioner. I'm trying to use this the way that, not God intended, but like food. But you understand what I'm trying to say, so.
No, balance that out. I mean, it's balance, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if you spend your whole day in the office crafting the perfect Facebook message, you kind of missed out.
Right. Right.
Last question, I think, and we'll wrap it up. But how do you stay on top of the latest updates, innovations, and platforms for ministry that are available? There are so many out there, and you know, the fact that we're still trying to set up Twitter accounts, you know, if that's kind of shows how quick things change. So how do you stay on top of this without investing all of your time trying to stay on top of it?
I talked to my niece, who's 19 now. I talked to my niece, who's 13. No kidding. I asked, what are you guys using? It's the only way I can figure it out. Or ask the soldiers.
Yeah, definitely.
They'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's, I think, two lanes, like relationally, it's that, you know, like you're just around people that are of that, you know, younger soldiers, younger enlisted, And when you're just hanging out, they're doing it on their phones anyway. So you're like, what's that? Oh, that's how you do that? Oh, okay, that's how you make a sticker, or that's how you do that? Okay, cool, I see what you're doing. So there's always a learning curve there with, just being around it. But Drew had said earlier, like, kind of the easy way is just go on like the Apple Store and see what the top downloaded apps are. If there's one on social media that's tracking, that's probably what's happening right now.
Yeah, so everything they said, 100%. I think you don't need to be searching for the next best thing. Let other people do the searching for you, and when it's being used, then jump on the bandwagon, right? So go to the Apple Store, top 10, 15 apps, download them, see what they are, see how they work. If you want to use it, they're popular for a reason, right? And they're up there because they're the most downloaded. And if it's a social media one or something that's loosely tied to it, find out if your Joes are using it. Ask your 56 mic or something like that. Hey, do you use this? Or have you heard of this? What do you think of it? Because it's a competition, right? All these businesses are competing for events. Snapchat was like going to be the dominant figure a year ago, and right now, because Instagram came out with its own short stories, short videos that mirrors what Instagram's doing, like Snapchat's going down a little bit, Instagram's going up. So maybe Snapchat actually ends up dying and Instagram takes the prize, or maybe they're going to battle it out for a while and Snapchat wins, or something else pops up, right? 10 years from now, maybe we don't even use our phones anymore because there's some other technology, right? So it's just kind of, I think, looking at what's selling and talking to the people.
So MySpace is outdated, you're saying?
Yeah, MySpace, Friendster, all those.
Any other questions before we close? Well, all right. Well, thank you very much to our panel. We appreciate it.